Hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie Boozer. I'm with CGC HQ, and I'm happy to welcome you to today's Connect webinar with Citrix. We're going to be talking about remote access and bringing your remote access solution into the future. But before we get into our main presentation today, I want to introduce who all's on our call with us. We have Gabe Correjo. He is a Senior Program Manager at Citrix. Monica Grismers, she is a Product Marketing Specialist. Jake Gretzky, Senior Product Marketing Manager, and you've probably seen him around at some CGC XL events around the country. And Joshua Sundquist, he's the Director of Workspace and, can't see all of my screen, sorry, Workspace and Platform Architecture. As we get into this presentation, each of these guys will be taking a turn presenting, and we'd love to have you type in your questions in the question panel. We will hold all of the questions until the end, but we do want you to type those questions in as you have them so that you can remember what you're asking about, and we know that they'll come up throughout the presentation. But to keep things flowing, we'll hold them all to the end. And one other final note, our presentation is being recorded today, so you will receive an email tomorrow with a link to the recording in case you need to go back and revisit things. So with that, I'm going to turn things over. I think, Gabe, am I handing things over to you first?
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Stephanie. And one quick housekeeping note, my Twitter account is @CitrixGabe. I think the @Gabe Correjo is taken by some gentleman out in San Jose. So
oh, no.
if you need to tweet at me, it's Citrix Gabe. No worries at all. All right.
I'll put that in the chat for everybody.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, everybody. So we're here to chat, and I'm so happy to have co-presenters on this topic. You know, who those are really the subject matter experts that you're really here to listen to. And we're here to discuss how you can increase your user productivity and realize that traditional remote access solution you may have today with, you know, Citrix technologies. And I'm going to start off with sharing our agenda today. And my section is Introduction and Overview to give you kind of the background. Jake Gretzky is going to then chat with you about, you know, how there can be a fragmented story with other solutions. And then Joshua Sundquist will come in and talk about our real-world deployment example, you know, the true meat of this webinar, where, you know, he'll talk about going from 0 to 140,000 deployed users with remote PC access. And then Monica will come in and chat about, you know, how you're not leaving this behind to one use case, but you're utilizing the value of the license to expand and bring in the future into your workspace. And then lastly, I'll have some wrap up and key takeaways to kind of remind you what you heard about today from a story perspective, and then we'll have Q&A. So with that, I'll get started. And so conjecturally, you can talk about how companies have allowed since mid-90s, 1990s, remote access to PCs. And they started out way back, if you can recall, you know, dialing up using an RRAS server with PC Anywhere, you know, and utilizing those kinds of systems, which then gravitated into utilizing maybe the baked-in technology. But why did they do this? Why do IT admins and corporations allow remote access to PCs? And it's very simple. There's, you know, business challenges that occur seasonally, like in the Northeast, you know, these huge, you know, winter events, you know, Snowmageddon, you know, you see that Twitter handle all the time, right? You want to allow a more malleable or work-shifting, teleworking workplace so that your employees can have a great work-life balance. You know, and then everybody's heard of VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure. You may have a PC refresh moment at some point, and you know you're either turning to VDI or you're considering it, or maybe you've decided that VDI is not for you, but you still have that business challenge of providing, you know, secure, fantastic experience to those desktops and laptops. So some folks think the business PC is dead. I tend to disagree. You know, So does Gartner, and some of the other industry analysts tracking the shipment of business PCs. In fact, PCs grew last year and into this Q1. They grew quarter after quarter for the first time in many years, and that growth is driven by Windows 10. And you may find a specific Gartner report where it talks about, well, it declined in Q4. Well, it declined because there was a shortage of CPUs, not actually a market dip. So there's still quite a bit of investment in business PCs and laptops within corporations. So how did they allow remote access to PCs today? If you take a look at the broad swath of the market, typically there's going to be within a company or a small business that has less than 500 users, they may not have an IT representative. So they may search for something that's cloud-based, that's very self-service and unmanaged, if you will. But if they have, branch offices, a medium business or large enterprise, typically what they've done is they've purchased these point appliances to allow SSL VPN connectivity and then launch an RDP session or some sort of maybe VNC session as well. But those are highly managed and they can be fragmented, so the user experience can be poor, or it can be unmanaged, where it's really kind of a free-for-all. The users load up a VPN and they launch an application, and they have to remember their machine name or IP address, and then they have to authenticate multiple times. So that can be kind of a fragmented solution, and Jacob will talk a little bit more in depth there. What we've seen primarily is if you're a Citrix admin or a virtual apps deployment, you'll publish an application, whether that's the remote desktop application or BNC or some other sort of remote application. You'll present that to a group of users or all users through Active Directory, and then you'll connect with what was known as receiver, now Workspace app, through the gateway that might be on-prem or in a branch office, etc. Now with the cloud, it can be through the cloud. But that's a HDX protocol session, which then gets lost end-to-end connectivity because you're using the other protocol from the published application server. So you'll see in quotes here, I have XenApp presentation server. That's historically what is in customers' deployments from a product name. But when you look at it, you lose a lot of that protocol security, single sign-on, and analytics because you're transitioning from one protocol to another. So the most broad deployment, as I shared in the previous slide, is kind of loading up RDP through a VPN tunnel. And so while that's great, you lose some of the benefits of the protocol that Citrix has been well known for 30 plus years. And when it comes down to being able to provide a seamless, smart, and transition experience between any device and any connection, that's where we can add a lot of value and provide a seamless experience where you may have a fragmented experience today. So with that, I wanted to transition over to Jacob, and he can talk a little bit more about this fragmented story between RDP, VPNs, and what you may or may not own. So Jacob, I'm going to transition over to you.
All right, Gabe, thank you very much. Hopefully you can hear me all right.
We sure can, thank you.
Perfect. And then now hopefully everyone can see my screen. So my area of focus, right, is of course networking. Hopefully everyone knows that. If you don't, well, you do now. So my area of focus is all of our networking products, ADC, SD-WAN, etc. So VPN it's a networking technology, and it's been around for a really long time. And the whole idea was, well, as people move outside and start working remotely, we can give them some sort of security because apps did not exist. SaaS apps did not exist, and they didn't always exist. So we needed a way to secure remote access, and the first technology to kind of try to do that was a VPN. Now, I'm not picking on any specific vendors here. These are just some common some common ones out there. Obviously, our ADC provides its own SSL VPN. But from a user perspective, when you think about it, it's a little kludgy. You have to log in, and then there's this little thing, that runs down the tray, and you have to make sure you're connected. And if it gets disconnected, or maybe there's some issue and you get disconnected throughout the day, that might disrupt, what you're trying to do and doing your work and getting things done. So if we dive a little bit deeper and look at what is VPN? I mean, what's the whole point? The idea here is on the right side, you've got your resources. Now those are data, those are servers, applications, web services, files, any number of different things. I don't care where they live, right? It might be in public cloud, might be on-prem, some co-location facility, anywhere, and you're putting them in some sort of, perimeter of security. Usually that's a firewall. So I'm abstracting that as much as I can. Now, the idea of remote access, that's that guy over there on the left. And obviously there is some sort of remote connection. Now, when you bring a VPN into play, what you're effectively doing is you're extending that tunnel into the user there. So when that happens, let me see if I can mute my phone here. I do apologize, everybody. When you extend that network onto the user, you're effectively bringing that secure network to the user. So if their laptop is untrusted, well, you kind of need to be concerned about that. Even if you are, maybe it's a corporate laptop, who knows what happens in between when, I forgot to connect, or maybe my son took it to school or doing some schoolwork. There's going to be some potential for issues there. So we need to think about a couple of things. We need to think about a connection policy. When they connect, am I going to allow access to only these certain servers or only these certain resources? Also, what am I going to do with all of the other traffic? Am I going to backhaul that, SaaS app traffic? Am I going to split tunnel it? And that's a whole other security concern there. So there's a lot of things you really need to think about when you are talking about VPNs. And again, what happens if that system is compromised or has some malware or something on it, where are you really going to trust that they are going to connect up to your VPN tunnel? So we're going to talk about that a little bit more here in just a minute. But I want to talk about the applications too and the user experience. So from a network perspective, let's say that everywhere inside our trusted resource zone, maybe we have somewhere below 2 milliseconds of latency. That's totally acceptable. Applications are fine. It doesn't matter. I don't see any issues, things like that. But outside of that trusted network, if I go to Starbucks, or I'm coming in from home, maybe I have a latency of somewhere around 30 milliseconds, maybe higher, maybe a little lower. But when I'm working on applications, if I'm just connected to a VPN, my round trip time to that application is somewhere around 62 milliseconds, right? Give or take, 30, 32 milliseconds each way. Now that's not too bad. But what happens if I'm somewhere else, right? And all of a sudden my latency bumps up to 60 milliseconds. Well, now all that, database traffic or application traffic, that now has to go about 120 milliseconds of round trip time. So that's always been the problem with VPNs, because it just means the user experience just isn't that great, because again, SaaS applications did not always exist, and the apps on-prem, they were never built for highly latent networks. Now, if only we had some sort of protocol that we could use to present a remote desktop. But wait, there's more, right? So that's where RDP comes in. Now, I'm going to caveat all of that with a few things to remember. RDP is built into Windows, period. So it's pretty set in concrete as to what RDP client you have when you are on, let's say Windows 7 or Windows 8 or 10. and what RDP server version is on 2008, 2012, like 16, 19, etc. So those are pretty set in stone. Obviously, there is a little bit of play. You can upgrade a little bit, but it's built in. And that's another key, because if something is built into Windows, that means it's always going to be there. And that attack surface is that just opens the door. So there was a recent vulnerability where Microsoft basically said that you should really be concerned, because there is a way for users to, unauthenticated users, to attack your system via vulnerability in RDP. Now that's pretty significant. It was significant enough that Windows XP, which is no longer supported unless you have an extended support contract, and I don't even know if those are still around, I'm sure they are, but Microsoft even released a patch for Windows XP for this vulnerability, right? So that should kind of tell you how big of a deal this was. This isn't the only one, unfortunately. Now there was a vulnerability, and Microsoft obviously is very good about patching vulnerabilities. But what's unique about this is that it would prevent connections in the event of a version mismatch. So for example, if you had on your laptop, you keep up to date with Windows Update and you update very frequently, if you update your RDP client via Windows Update, but the machine that you're connecting to isn't, well, then all of a sudden you get this wonderful error you see here on the screen, and you can't log in. Same goes for if your server gets updated and your client is not, etc. And this was a really good thing for Microsoft to do, because it allowed them to kind of mitigate this issue where if one of those, if the client or the server was up to date, then hey, I'm going to make sure that I prevent this connection from happening because it's potentially vulnerable. So what are the common ways that RDP is deployed? Let's just hope that this doesn't happen anymore. And I hope everybody on this webinar goes and checks and makes sure that 3389 is not open through their firewall, period, ever. Because if it is, please stop. Stop that right now. So in that case, right, what do we do when we need to add some additional security? Well, one of the things that we can usually do is we can potentially add another form of authentication, right? We can add a multi-factor auth. So whether that's a software token or hardware token, or a call me or text me, that sort of thing. Unfortunately for RDP, even though this looks really cool, it doesn't actually exist, right? Because without Azure AD and some of the new features and capabilities with WVD and Azure AD, this enhanced RDP just isn't possible, right? You can't have multi-factor authentication. So you can't secure it that way. There's some other things that you need to think about when you're using just pure RDP. And one of those things is, what happens when those machines on the back end, what if they're set to go to sleep, or what if they're turned off? I mean, if these are workstations, there is a good possibility that they could be set to turn off. So that's something else that you have to worry about. And if I'm a remote worker, I'm a road warrior, I just want to RDP into my system, but I forgot that I turned it off at the end of the day. Maybe that's a support call, a hands-on call, or maybe I just don't have any options. Well, I can't do my work. That's no good. So long story short here, please don't be exposing 3389 through your firewalls, right? That's a no-no. Let's look at some different options. Now, obviously, as Gabe mentioned before, one of the most common deployments is putting a VPN connection in front of that. Now, that does a lot of good things, right? You log into the VPN, and there you can do some multi-factor auth stuff. And then you log into your RDP. Now, hopefully here you can kind of see the problem. The first is that's a two-step process, right? I have to know where I'm connecting, I have to know my credentials, and I have to know that once I get connected, I need to stay connected, and if I disconnect, well, I got to go through this whole process again. So it's not the prettiest thing in the world. So this is really kind of a choppy way of doing that, and obviously there's a better way to do things. So what I wanted to talk about is that remote protocol itself. Obviously RDP there's great use cases for it, but they're kind of limited, and trying to do things outside of that limited use case, like, administrator access or things like that, that's when RDP kind of falls down. So I'm going to talk a little bit about ICA and HDX. And there's a lot of things here. There's continued investment. As Gabe said, we've been doing it for a really long time, and there's a lot of performance and capability. But traditionally, ICA and HDX has been related to virtual apps and virtual desktops, or Zen Apps and Desktop as it was formerly known. But the remote PC use case is the whole thing that we've been talking about, that gets rid of the requirement for VPN and then connect to RDP and do all that sort of thing, that gives you all the great benefits of ICA and HDX, things like the security, like the multi-factor, like the better performance across the WAN, significantly more so, right? Then you don't have to worry about a VPN connection, then the RDP connection. Plus, you get all the bonuses of HDX, like the WAN efficiency, integration with SD-WAN, the watermarking, anti-screen capture security features that have recently come out. So you're getting that full experience, and the use case that you're fulfilling is kind of unique, and hopefully it makes it that much better for the users, because all of those security policies that we talked about with VPNs, you don't have to worry about, because you've already got those policies in place for their workstation. Now you're getting them a full fidelity and high efficiency experience from the outside. So to talk about that a little bit more, I wanted to hand over to Joshua, because he has very recently been through this, and hopefully he can talk some more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand this over to Joshua.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joshua Sundquist. As mentioned, let me just pull up my slides. There we go. And hopefully everybody can see my screen.
Looks great.
Awesome. All right. So my name is Joshua Sundquist. I was asked to come and speak with everyone today as a customer. I only joined Citrix a few months back. Prior to that, I worked on Wall Street in the big financial enterprise firms for about 20 years. And my experience with remote PC kind of goes back to the beginning, hence the name of this slide. The scenario that I'll talk through today started off more than several years ago. The environment was running Zen Desktop 5. If you want to put a time frame on it, total endpoints were about 140,000. Of those, about 40,000 were virtuals, VDIs, and the others were about 100,000 physical devices. And for the time that we were doing that, those were high numbers. To give everyone some context and some history, the company had decided that they were going to go all in on Zen Desktop and VDI, and at the time they were even considering going with VDI for all users, regardless of the use case. Obviously, that changed over time, because as most of us in the Citrix space know, there's great use cases for everything, but generally applying the one use case to everyone doesn't always make sense, which left us in the position where we had the mixed environment. We had a big chunk of VDI machines, but a bigger chunk of physical machines. At the time, the connectivity model was going through a third-party gateway appliance that used an ActiveX control as the RDP agent. It actually worked pretty well, but I'm sure, as most people know, what happened to ActiveX, Microsoft killed it, and the company that made the appliance didn't have a replacement that didn't require jumping through a lot of hoops. So suddenly we were in a position where we needed to come up with an alternative, and quick. Obviously, anyone who was using Zen Desktop was able to connect beautifully and seamlessly through web interface at the time, but anyone who was connecting to physical needed to find a way as well. Our workaround at the time, because it was needed quick and relatively painlessly, was to publish RDP as a Zen app application. It did work, generally speaking, covered a lot of use cases. It allowed people to connect to their physicals. And I'll go through some of the specifics. We did have some issues that came with that setup, because we were double hopping using the two protocols that Jake mentioned. Users with anything other than basic home setups, just they had their machine with one monitor at home, they tended to work okay. People who had things like mixed resolution setups weren't great. Apple users in particular, a lot of them like to have their Apple laptop with an external display, which is 2 different resolutions, and they didn't work very well. And around that time, people started vocally saying to us things along the lines of, well, why can't we have the Zen desktop experience when we connect to our physicals? We didn't have a good answer to them, so we went to Citrix and said, can you please consider making a VDA that we can use on physical desktops? There were some other issues that came along with that as well. For example, publishing RDP to accommodate these tens and tens and tens of thousands of users meant that we were also carrying over 700 XenApp servers dedicated to doing nothing other than hosting published RDP. That was for primary servers as well as, HA and DR capabilities. So the problem that we were trying to solve as an engineering/architecture team, we had to provide remote access to physical desktops. That's a given. We had to have data leakage prevention controls. So for anyone who works in highly regulated industries like finance and healthcare or government, military, it's just not an option to not have those controls in place. And ideally, you don't want the controls to be too heavy-handed. Situations where you either have to just turn something on across the board or off across the board usually aren't great, because it means you end up turning off a lot more than you really required to. An issue that we had was native RDP DLP controls were mostly either on or off with not much flexibility. So if you wanted clipboard, you could turn it on or you could turn it off, but you couldn't do anything granular with it as far as I want it on in these situations and off in those situations, or I want to be able to paste into the session but not out of the session. We also needed different DLP control behavior depending on the user, whether the user was on-prem or remote. So for example, if the user was just connecting from one company office to a different company office to a desktop there, we wanted them to be able to copy and paste and use client drive mapping and all the other goodies that the virtual channels bring us. But if they were connecting remotely from offsite, from a Starbucks or from home, we needed to be able to turn those things off. And we also needed to be able to apply different controls to different sets of users in different geographical areas. For example, we found out there was a legal requirement in Switzerland that the users there could only print from company offices, and they should never be allowed to print from anywhere outside of company offices. So we had to solve for that, but that scenario also only applied to users in Switzerland. When you get into these complex scenarios, you really need something with really robust and flexible policies, and a lot of times native RDP just didn't have it. So here's our original solution, published RDP. It did technically solve our requirements. It gave us the DLP controls on the ICA stack. Failed pretty miserably on the RDP stack, but we had our workaround. It was a horrible user experience with mixed resolution scenarios. As I said, when you had Apple Mac laptop users with an external display and they would try to connect, usually what would happen is the RDP session would choose one of the resolutions, either the smaller laptop screen or the bigger external screen, and it would set the entire session on both screens to that resolution, which either resulted in what we called the scroll bars of doom, where your resolution was so big on the screens that you just had these endless scroll bars, or it was the opposite, where the resolution was so high that on your small laptop screen, you could barely read any of the text. And so it was a really bad scenario. We didn't have a solution for it other than to tell users, well, pick a screen, either use your laptop screen or use your external display, but not both. And they kind of looked at us like, really, that's your answer? We also had a lot of complaints around choppy, unreliable mouse and keyboard response. The old, you type 5 lines of text and then you watch the ghost on the screen start to fill it in a few seconds after you've typed it. Poor multimedia experience. Again, anyone who works in a highly regulated environment, you have to do tons and tons and tons of compliance training, which are usually these, fun videos that you get to watch. And video, when you're double hopping an RDP session through an ICA session, just wasn't great, to be polite. and different user connection workflow depending on if they're connecting to a physical over RDP or directly to a virtual using ICA. If you're connecting to your Zen desktop, you just go and click your computer and off you go. If you're connecting to a physical, you would have to launch the RDP client, wait for that to load, then know what your machine name was, type it in, and then connect to it. And trying to explain to users why they had to do two different things depending on what type of machine they were connecting to, again, wasn't a great scenario. Then you get into the technical side of it. It's greater administrator overhead. You're dealing with multiple different management consoles, one to manage the RDP direct connections, one to manage the ICA connections. You have different sets of policies to control the session behavior. You're dealing with help desk complexity. When a user calls in saying, I'm having a problem working remotely, the first thing a help desk person has to do is spend time trying to figure out, okay, are they trying to connect in via RDP or via ICA, while the user was saying, like, I don't get it. Why are you wasting my time with this? We haven't even started trying to troubleshoot my issue. Hence, we get into remote PC. Gabe and the talented folks at Citrix answered our prayers and said, hey, we've got a VDA coming around for physical. Do you want to give it a try? And we said, yes, please. The reason I'm showing this architecture on the screen is to really just highlight the fact that remote desktop, or what we always called VDA on physical, doesn't require you to change your environment at all. This was, a typical architecture for fully on-prem environment, which is the one that we were working in. This is just your classic Zen desktop, or now, virtual desktop environment. And you just load up your VDAs, you point to your existing controllers, and you don't have to do anything different. Life is pretty sweet and pretty good. Obviously, as your environment grows, you may want to add more sites, etc., but you don't have to make any significant changes to your infrastructure to start using this today, which is another thing that made it really attractive for us. So getting into the remote PC access solution, it did fully solve all of our requirements and added several benefits. On the IT side, it gave us those flexible data leakage prevention controls that allowed us to lock down only what was needed. And again, anyone who's lived with, a highly regulated IT scenario, you can't allow certain types of data to go out, but you can allow certain types of data to come in. Having the ability to really granularly just go and flip the switches that we had to, while leaving all the other capabilities open and available for users, made users' lives easier, and then it made IT's lives easier. Again, one set of policies to manage across all of our desktops by just standardizing on using ICA as our protocol, as our remote access protocol, regardless of whether you're connecting to physical or virtual, allowed us to go and set up our policies in one place and be done, rather than trying to figure out how to get the same policy results into different protocol environments. Also, one set of management tools and consoles, no having to deal with having, an RDP management console open on one side and your, Citrix management consoles on the other. One set of management tools as well. Help desk simplification, no need to spend time determining what type of machine a user's trying to connect to. They're all trying to connect the same way, and you can just jump right into solving the problem. Another, unexpected benefit for us was extending your Citrix Analytics capabilities, because it looks into the ICA connections and can tell you what's going on and where things aren't going well. By connecting over ICA to all of our desktops, regardless of whether they were physical or virtual, extended those analytic capabilities into our entire footprint. From a user perspective, it gives users a great experience, even with complex setups like mixed resolution displays. What's funny is when we first brought in what again we called VDN physical remote PC, we originally were only targeting users with known bad scenarios. So someone like with their Apple laptop with an external display, we offered this to them as a solution. Word started to spread among the user community that this thing was the greatest thing since sliced bread when you're working remotely, because it gives you that in-person experience even though you're working remotely. And as it started to gain the positive reputation, people started coming to us and saying, can I have remote PC? They weren't calling it that, but we knew what it was. And we said, well, why? Do you have this, mixed resolution scenario? Do you have any of these known bad scenarios? And they said, no, but I saw Jill using it, and it's awesome, and I want that because when I work from home, I've got mouse lag and everything else. And so users actually started calling our service desk and asking to be set up on it. Eventually, we came to the conclusion that it just made sense to deploy the VDA on all of our machines by default, because we already had the licensing in place because our entire enterprise was using various Citrix products for different reasons. And the benefits were so great that it was worth going through the process. Other benefits for users, which again, you're comparing it to them connecting over either a published RDP or RDP over a VPN. HDX gives you that rich audio, video, multimedia. Watching those compliance training videos is suddenly a bit less painful, at least from a technology perspective. Even if they're connecting over a less than ideal network. Prime example, I've been staying in a lot of hotels lately related to work, and they give you that, bottom tier, not very fast connection. And I've been, having to take those same compliance videos, having started at Citrix, and it just works over HDX. Over native RDP, just not so great. The real-time optimization pack for Skype that stacks on top of your ICA session gives you top quality video and audio calls as if you're in the office. And that's been something that's been a lot of fun too, is working remotely and making a Skype call to colleagues of mine and them having to ask me, are you remote today? Because I don't see you at your desk, but it sounds like you're in the office. So that's always, awesome. Going along with it, another benefit was we scripted power on, off, and restart capabilities into the user portal using Wake on LAN links so that users could self-service their VDI restarts, and that includes physical and virtual. So it's, again, one of those cases of if your desktop went to sleep, if your desktop got shut down over the weekend, you don't have to call your office mate and ask them if they can walk over and push the button on your PC. We were able to do it through Wake on LAN, and the users can do it right through the web interface. I'm sure that we've all also had the scenarios where your session gets hung. And now what do? I've got to call the help desk and ask them to remote into my machine and manually kick it. Users can do it themselves now, and it just makes it so much easier for them. Also, the same user experience, regardless of whether they're connecting to a physical or virtual. Gone is the headache of trying to explain to the user, well, you have a physical desktop that's your primary machine, so you have to write down your machine name and you have to go take these extra steps in order to connect, versus the Zen desktop experience, which is just click on the machine, off you go. Now they all connect the same way regardless. So as you can see, hopefully it wasn't firing through there too quickly, but this is a real world scenario. It's not marketing fluff. I can tell you this as a Citrix customer, and it really did solve our issues and then made our lives on the IT side dramatically easier. Users loved it, and we all know that that's a pretty rare combination where IT is able to put something in that makes their own lives easier and that users really love as well. So there it is. Feel free to hit me on Twitter or LinkedIn or wherever else you like to, and I'm happy to talk through any scenario I can help with, because like I said, at this point in my mind, I'm still more customer than anything, and I still think like a customer. So that's it. And once we got that together and we were able to unify that whole remote access experience, that brought us to considering what else we could unify and how we could get even more value from our Citrix products, which I will hand over to Monica to talk about that.
Perfect. Thank you, Joshua. Okay, so I hope you all can see my screen. My name is Monica Grismer, and I am a product marketing specialist here at Citrix, specifically in the workspace realm, but then also for virtualization. So as Josh was just very eloquently stating, remote PC access is a great solution for user experience, and it gives your users seamless and optimized access to their desktops and all of the resources they need. But getting started with remote PC access also gives you a great opportunity to maximize other Citrix offerings for your users. So every company most definitely has dynamic, varying use cases, and different capabilities of our offerings may be right for some of your users. So I'd like to tell you a little bit more today about how not only can you use remote PC access to get introduced to more Citrix offerings, but it can also get you started with heading to the workspace. So a great place to get your foot in the door with Citrix is through our content collaboration. It's a tool for both on-prem and service customers to securely share and collaborate on their files. I hope many of you are familiar with it, but as your user needs grow, we definitely want to find new ways to keep your employees productive. So your Citrix content collaboration may currently aggregate just files, which is the screenshot on the left, and when integrated with Citrix Workspace offerings, your files are aggregated alongside all of your other resources for easy access. Something else that I love about our Workspace offering and collaboration tools is that your users can access all of their data, doesn't matter where it's located, even if they're using OneDrive, Dropbox, SharePoint, on-prem stores, cloud stores, it doesn't matter. They can access their files all from one unified location. Another great offering that we have is Citrix Access Control. So you may have gotten started with remote PC access and introduced some file sharing into your environment, but you probably have a lot of users who are utilizing web and SaaS-based applications. So admins can deploy these applications securely with our access control capabilities. So this helps consolidate HDX proxy, single sign-on, and web filtering to all of these applications. Also, with our cloud app control, admins can enhance security as well as centrally manage their policies to display watermarks, restrict downloads, restrict printing from these sessions, say which specific websites they want individuals to not be able to access. Just as Jake was speaking earlier about the functionalities that are within remote PC to do these things, you can also do this with your web and SaaS with access control. Additionally, something exciting is that access control for Storefront is currently in tech preview to be GA'd soon. So I talked a little bit about the workspace, but as you're making your journey there, I know everyone is in different phases of their journey. After you've incorporated files, web, SaaS, you can introduce your enterprise applications as well as desktops, and we call it one single pane of glass of the Citrix workspace itself. So you can also deploy your remote PC access desktop within the workspace interface alongside all of your other apps and files. So this single location is definitely great for your users who are using, there's a tablet shown here, maybe they're using mobile devices, PCs, Macs, it doesn't matter, they get one unified workspace. So that's definitely something that we're very proud of as Citrix and is what we love is one common platform. But to that regard, a great thing about this unified experience is that we also introduce the choice of multi-cloud environments. So for both potentially on-prem to cloud hybrid environments or multi-cloud deployments, they're all optimized by Citrix technologies and can leverage our HDX technologies and different protocols. So admins are given the choice of cloud platforms and deployment scenarios that work best for them. So you can see all of the platforms that we support, which we've been supporting for a long time now, but in addition to these, we will also soon be supporting VMware Cloud on Amazon Web Services and also the new Windows Virtual Desktops offering from Azure. So that introduces even more cloud and deployment choices, whatever works best for your respective environments. And something else, if you all were able to attend or tune into Synergy, really big is that our workspace intelligent features are where you can eventually move your workspace to. So this is where we're headed. This is just a design concept as of now. Just wanted to give you all a little bit more insight into the future of our tech. So firstly, we wanted to point out the search functionalities. So within the Citrix workspace, you'll not only be able to aggregate your files, web, web and SaaS apps, published apps, desktops, but also there will be a feed. So there's a lot of content within your workspace itself. So there will be a search functionality to be able to easily find items that you're specifically looking for. But the newest part of the intelligent features that we're introducing are the feed capabilities. So that is where our micro app builders come into play. So you create micro apps out of the applications and desktops you're already using so that we can pull different notifications and tasks into the resource feed so that your users can have a linear process of how to get work done. So this is not only a place for everyone to have a launching point to access their web, SaaS, all of their resources, but to actually do their work and be even more productive to help your company out. And then lastly, like I said before, your apps and desktops are still there, still aggregated, and your files are still in line with all of your other resources. So very exciting. Just wanted to give you a little bit more insight into where we're heading and where you can look forward to your Citrix deployments running off to in the future. So that was a very high-level overview of everything that you can do with, well, actually just a few things that you can do with Citrix solutions in addition to your remote PC offerings. So once you get your foot in the door with remote PC and the following capabilities, that's just the beginning. Solving your use cases with Citrix technologies can get you acclimated with our capabilities and jumpstart your move into the greater Citrix workspace. So now that you've seen how getting started with remote PC access can accelerate your journey to Workspace, I'm gonna turn it back over to Gabe for some key takeaways.
Great, thank you, Monica. Thank you, team. I appreciate it. Great segments as usual, and wait for the screen to switch over here.
Okay.
Great, thank you so much, Monica. So some of the key takeaways that you learned over the last 45 minutes is that, we want to present to you a solution that reduces frustrations that users may have that you don't know about with remote access to existing PCs. Enable that flexible work style over any device and any connection. Reduce your time spent, managing the PCs and from a patching perspective or the overhead of making sure they're all up to date to a certain extent. Gain more value if you have existing licenses, perhaps thinking about new ways where you can consume them or help your customers consume them. And being able to unify the analytics, insights, and security postures from a single integrated solution without having to think about what type of solution is deployed to which user community. And then starting from that strategic use case, that one thing that you're thinking about solving and migrating to your workspace of the future. And we hope that, every one of these sections will help you think or, look towards the future and not just leaving behind maybe a single deployment offering. So from a deployment architecture viewpoint, it's very simple, as you can see here. When you introduce the Citrix Cloud Service and the Gateway Service, you effectively can become infrastructureless. So a lot of the times we talk about the on-prem solutions. This is also mix and match. So you can add networking appliances to your gateway, to your your cloud services, and vice versa. So there's totally flexible deployment models. We're bringing all these great technologies to you within this simple architecture. Just a reminder: protection from key logging, screen capture, being able to watermark that session without having to buy other third-party solutions. So all that comes baked in with the product solution, and we just released a reference architecture for remote PC access, and we just also had a master class on having to think about how you can solve the physical dilemma, if you will, with PCs with Citrix solutions, and then a whole other supplemental resource that you can either view demo videos or kind of read some of our blogs. So with that, we'll open it up to questions if there are any. Appreciate your time today. So we're concluded with our segment here.
Hey, Gabe.
question.
Quick, there were actually two that came in pretty similar. Can you elaborate on licensing? For example, what license is required to get the remote PC capability?
Yeah, so actually that's funny. I had a slide in here and I chose to delete it on that. So from a licensing perspective, and Monica, you can keep me honest here. From a cloud perspective, it's in the virtual apps and desktop service and our Workspace suite licensing. From a perpetual or on-prem type, it's in our premium and premium plus. Monica? She may have stepped away, but it's basically in our top level entitlements.
Right. Sorry, I couldn't go off mute, Gabe. It's in Perpetual, Advanced, and Premium is the new names.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And Gabe, one other question, pretty technically specific, but I think we're on the right track. I did respond, but it was a good question around, obviously with remote PC, you're connecting to a desktop OS computer. What happens when you have multiple users, maybe like on different shifts, like day shift, night shift, that are going to use the same machine? Can you elaborate a little bit there? It looks like it just shows as unavailable to them. I assume that's correct.
Yeah, that's correct, and maybe also Joshua can throw out a little clarity from a real-world experience. But the way it's architected is that it's single user, single OS, and so it's not anywhere near the multi-user experience. So if a single user is accessing it and another user wants to connect, you can set up a kind of an authority instance where the remote user can make the request to the local user, and the local user will see that request. That is done through a registry key that's on our Citrix documentation Citrix documentation website. And then, if the users are still logged or disconnected, and another user attempts to log in, they won't be able to connect because we see that another user is logged in. So that it was primarily built for single user, single OS use cases. But if you'd like to see it work in broader use cases like that for more functionality, contact the Citrix sales representatives.
Great. I think we're all set as far as questions go. Gabe, thank you very much.
Okay. Well, thank you, Stephanie. I think we hand it back to you. Is that right?
Yeah, I just have a couple of links I'm going to throw in the chat window for everyone. And then I have a couple of events I want to tell you all about. So I'll pull that screen up right now. And there you go. Okay. So just want to thank you all for being with us today. Really appreciate everyone's time. And let you know about a couple of events coming up. So the Citrix Future of Work Tour that was mentioned earlier, I believe the virtual edition of that is coming up in August, and CGC will have a booth there. So we'd love to have you stop by and say hello. And we also have two of our Excel events coming up, one in the Midwest and one in the Great Lakes in September. So if you guys are anywhere near those cities, Cincinnati or Milwaukee, definitely check those out. You'll see in the chat window, there's a link to our events calendar. You can get everything that you need to know about the virtual Future of Work Tour, as well as the Excel events and all of our other local events and upcoming webinars on that calendar. So please check it out. And then also in the chat window, you will see a link to a survey. It's short, it's anonymous. We just like to get your feedback on all of our webinars. Love to see what you think. If there are any areas we can improve, if you have suggestions for future topics, send us all your feedback. We love to get it. And finally, hope that you will follow us on Twitter at myCUGC. It's the best way to keep up to date with everything that's going on with CUGC, with our local events, our webinars, our blogs. We have lots of stuff on Twitter, and then everything on the website. We tweet about it all the time, so definitely follow us if you want to stay up to date. And that is it for me. I want to thank everyone again, Gabe, Joshua, Monica, and Jake. Thanks so much for being with us today. And thank you all you attendees for spending an hour of your day with us. And I hope
Thank you so much, Stephanie. It was a pleasure.
Thanks all.
All right, well, I hope to have you guys back on another webinar again soon, and we'll look for everyone online at mycgc.org. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.